Day 887 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 577,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,060 in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, a whopping 25 tanks, 38 APVs, and 46 artillery. As there has been a great deal of recent activity on the map, which I'll get to shortly. But firstly, to take a quick refresher update look at the territory of control statistics, as currently Russia holds 18.13% of Ukrainian territory, which includes Crimea and the Donbass, which was taken many years ago before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Then as for the top figure, well, to provide some context firstly, Russia used to hold about 25% of Ukrainian territory at the height of its invasion. But of course, that's no longer the case, as Ukraine has since liberated 7.12% of that land, which can in fact be likened to a gambler chasing their losses at the casino. Then headed into the Russian map today because Russian media reported that attack drones targeted Mozdok, a Russian military airfield in North Ossetia, with this airfield located 800 kilometers or about 500 miles from Ukraine. Although initial reports don't confirm or deny any damage at this stage, it's quite fresh. Then just further northwest of here, as an explosion with dense smoke has been reported in Rostov, and reportedly at a warehouse containing drone components. Perhaps Sergei or Ivan administering unsafe handling practices of such precious goods once again. Then on the map, but perhaps what gets the least press at the moment, is where we have seen how Russia faces mounting domestic challenges as it grapples with the consequences of its war efforts and neglect of its own internal affairs. Take for instance, recently, a dam broke in Karjala, which is a few hundred kilometers northeast of St. Petersburg, highlighting the ongoing infrastructure problems plaguing the country. And in fact, in this instance, it was the breaking of a temporary bridge that likely should have been replaced or upgraded a long time ago. And yet, this situation is not isolated, as evidenced by other recent flooding events. Take for instance in Bashkortostan, where heavy rainfall reportedly submerged an entire village. So these incidents reflect a broader crisis stemming from budget cuts, neglected infrastructure, and the impact of widespread mobilization for the war effort, which has also led to the misappropriation of state and local funding for resources that would not have stopped these events, but likely would have slowed them down. So the frequency of these events underscores the far-reaching consequences of prioritizing military objectives over domestic needs. But it's not just a case of stolen infrastructure funding that was spent on the war. It's just as much an issue of utter denial from the State Duma, the politicians, the Kremlin, and the Russian state-controlled media outlets who don't give these very serious internal affairs the coverage they need. Because the guy at the top has decided that everything is secondary to the war next door. And since he started that war next door, single-handedly, then it makes for a problematic political situation whereby everything must be appearing as prosperous and as according to plan as possible. Then heading into the Ukrainian map today, we'll start out in the northeast as President Zelensky visited the Vovchansk district in the Kharkiv region near the Russian border. During his visit, he congratulated Special Operations Forces on their professional day and awarded them state honors for their bravery in defense and deoccupation efforts. Zelensky also acknowledged recent air defense reinforcements in Kharkiv, which have mitigated frequent Russian air attacks. So this could refer to anything from Gepards, Hawks, IRIS-Ts, or even the very newly arrived additional Patriot air defense battery, which, due to operational security requirements, it is not something that can be known for certain at this stage. Then we head across into the Ukrainian eastern Donbass region as Russia is pulling out all of the stops at the moment, with perhaps what will be the best of what the military, the Russian military, has to offer for the remainder of their summer offensive campaign season. Take, for instance, they will certainly leave no stone unturned in their attempts to advance all the way towards the key logistical route of the Pokrovsk-Konstantinivka main highway. And in fact, I'm reminded of how I placed a ruler measurement on the map right here sometime back in June, stating that for Russia to reach the highway, they would have to expand their bridgeheads and frontline assault positions to the tune of about 10-15 kilometers, to then utilize it as a sufficient base or springboard in which to launch further ground attacks with, thereby enabling a better position for them to reach the highway with. And true to life, they are setting up this approach, although the Russian military mindset may have gotten inadvertently distracted a little bit when it headed west then south most recently, as it chose to somewhat change course and become consumed by the need for the railway line. So I'm also guessing they found a bit of an entry point. And that might bring me to a larger point, as the Russian approach is not particularly innovative, as they send small tactical units against Ukrainian defenses daily until one position falls, then exploits the success. Though it's an incredibly costly strategy based on overmatching enemy positions purely by mass. And the more and more I think about it, it's actually almost quite literally a zombie attack strategy. And so how far can these zombie attacks get Russia? Although I don't recall the precise numbers, it was calculated in the past that for Russia to take all of Ukraine with this type of attritional warfare approach at their existing pace, they would need a population of 600 to 800 million or so able-bodied men, whereas the reality is such that the Russian population is about 140 million, with a below-average 46% male population rate. Then when you subtract for age, disabilities and so forth, Russia's overquoted superior mass or manpower is just at about 30 million. Maybe even less. Well, definitely less, considering the Kremlin's response to the question of general mobilization is always a repeated no, as was the case most recently, again when Peskov was asked the question. And although, yes, I am aware the Kremlin can lie, still, to turn back on a lie like this would be a very hard pill to swallow for the Russian population. Then, as for some more military news updates, in the Black Sea, recently it has been reported that the Russian Navy has redeployed 3 submarines equipped with cruise missiles from the Sea of Azov to the Black Sea. Now, for additional context, Russia currently only has 3 submarines in or around the Black Sea, and this is a reduction due to Ukraine successfully targeting and damaging and destroying the 4th submarine, the Rostov-on-Don, while it was in the dry docks in Sevastopol back in September last year. But also, ever since last year, there has been a significant decline in Russia's use of caliber cruise missiles, as these newer, younger Navy-launched and land attack missiles have never had the chance to build up 50 years of stockpiles for, unlike the rest of the Soviet munitions, thus making for the caliber cruise missiles becoming quickly depleted. And given the passage of time over the past year or so, we see they have struggled to replenish stocks. As such, these days only 2 or 3 caliber missiles are being fired per month from all naval platforms, which is a stark contrast to the dozens that were launched monthly or even weekly last year. Then take a look around, because somewhere on the map, Ukrainian drone operators finished off an abandoned Russian tank on the occupied left bank of the Kherson region. Then also, we saw the destroyed Russian Strela 10 air defense system somewhere at the front. These ones are highly mobile and are short-range surface air-to-missile systems designed to engage low-altitude threats such as helicopters and low-flying aircraft. Then we also saw Ukrainian soldiers from the 114th Separate Mechanized Brigade effectively destroy a Russian tank. It looks like a T-72 tank. So hard to say, but it's either that or a later model, as all of the older tanks have a much more distinctive museum piece look to their designs. Then, very most recently, in Toretsk of Donetsk, we saw the shattered remains of a Russian mechanized column burning after running into Ukrainian defenses. But then, because it's not always a success story for Ukrainian munitions, as with this next example, a Russian vehicle tried to escape from an FPV drone that it noticed chasing it, but then the driver lost control and crashed. See, you have nothing to fear but fear itself. Well, that and a well-trained Ukrainian FPV drone operator. Then headed across to some news for today. So Ukraine and Greece are in the final stages of negotiating a bilateral security agreement, with the signing expected to occur in the near future. So when completed, this agreement will be Ukraine's 26th bilateral security agreement in line with the G7 joint declaration adopted last year in Vilnius. And indeed, Greece would be a good partner for such a security agreement, as they tend to have a great deal of older and well-kept Soviet weapons, from artillery shells to vehicles to air defenses, you name it, that Ukraine can very easily pick up or hop in and start using straight away. Then in some more news, Germany has announced its latest military aid package and delivery to Ukraine, which includes a diverse range of equipment and supplies, including 8 Leopard 1A5 tanks, which was delivered in collaboration with Denmark. Also, an additional 22,000 rounds of ammunition for the Gepard's self-propelled anti-aircraft autocannons, 10 unmanned surface vehicles, armored recovery vehicles, 10 ground surveillance radars, and various other equipment, including a field hospital. And looking ahead for 2024, Germany plans to increase its military aid to Ukraine by an additional 3.8 billion euros, cementing its position as the second largest of aid providers to Ukraine. Then, as for number one, the United States has announced a new $200 million military aid package for Ukraine. This package, provided under the Presidential Drawdown Authority, or the PDA, will be sourced from existing US military stockpiles, ensuring rapid delivery to Ukraine. Key components of this aid package include NASAMS interceptors and air defense munitions, ammunition for HIMARS, and artillery shells for the 105 and the Gold Star NATO standard 155mm shells. Also included is precision aerial munitions like that of the JDAMs and GBU-39s, which I'm quite a fan of. You get about 110 kilometers out of those puppies. Then further to that, the aid includes RIM-7 missiles for air defense, anti-armor systems including TOW ATGMs, Javelins and AT-4s, electronic warfare equipment, 120mm mortar rounds, and a great deal of other ancillary equipment for this latest and relatively low-cost sustainment round package. Then taking a look at some of the Russian hardware news updates. This is halfway to legitimate, so I'll show you this one, as Russian forces are reportedly moving convoys of tanks, including the most advanced T-90M models, from St. Petersburg to reinforce their front lines with Ukraine. This information comes from the Atesh partisan movement, who have been tracking the movements of Russian military activities throughout Russia and beyond. Now, as a quick note, despite Russian claims of the T-90M superiority, these tanks have suffered big losses in Ukraine, with a bare minimum of 100 of these most advanced Russian tanks now destroyed, with all of the video and photographic evidence to show for it. But perhaps the real story here is how Russia is demilitarizing their own northern military core, or more specifically, what's known as their Western Military District, one of 5 military districts, with this one comprising of the regions of Moscow, St. Petersburg, and other areas in Western Russia, where it borders with several European countries, including Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, and Ukraine. So, given all these northern regions, that also includes the 2 major cities and oblasts of Russia, it's not exactly a location that you would want to, from a Russian perspective, drain or siphon your military hardware from, unless you really had to. Then headed across to some Russian economy news, as a recent statement from the chief of Russia's central bank paints a grim picture of the Russian economy. As Elvira Nabiulina, speaking at a recent press conference, highlighted a series of troubling issues that could spell long-term difficulties for the Russian economy, Take, for instance, with her stating, quote, all resources in the Russian economy are exhausted, inflation is rising, and there is an extreme lack of workforce. Adding money from reserves to the market will just increase inflation without bringing new growth. Russia is likely facing stagnation or a deep recession. So this candid admission comes at a time when the Russian economy is grappling with the effects of ongoing international sanctions and internal economic policies that have strained its financial system. Inflation has, of course, also been a persistent issue, eroding the purchasing power of citizens and complicating the lives of ordinary Russians. Then let's not forget the workforce shortage exacerbated by demographic challenges and outwards migration trends, which indeed adds another layer of complexity to the economic puzzle that is Russia. Now, interestingly, Nabiulina also stated that the main tool of inflation control, which is raising the central bank interest rate, is effectively an exhausted measure to use against future inflation, as going beyond the current rate of 18% will only lead to crushing the economy. So this one holds a troubling position. And in fact, Nabiulina tried to resign when the war started, but Putin wouldn't allow it. She was already pessimistic in the first month of the war about the economic future of Russia. But at the same time, right now, she's not exactly able to just go ahead and say, I told you so, to Putin either. So we here are bearing witness to a modestly modernized country, open for free-flowing international trade, up until this war, of course, then now being slowly but surely crushed underneath the weight of the most extensive list of sanctions the world has ever seen. Far greater than Iran or North Korea. So this is the real war right here, the impending economic destruction and fallout of the Russian economy. Then headed across to a quick funny to round it all off today, guys. So I was looking for a chance to squeeze this one in from a few days ago, as the Russian army has now seemingly taken to makeshift protection editions for their own howitzers. Now, first of all, it appears they put ERA blocks, which are designed for use on armoured vehicles, on the back of this confusing contraption, although they look more like actual bricks than ERA blocks, something we have in fact seen Russia institute before. But even if they are the real deal in this case, placing ERA blocks on the top of the recoil springs is just asking for more fragmentation damage to critical parts of the towed howitzer. But all of this begs the question, is that actually the top of the howitzer target? As this howitzer is not even facing upright into firing position. If anything, it's facing down. And I've said it before, but if a Ukrainian FPV drone can take out the most heavily armoured of Russian tanks, which I presume this scrappy piece of metal was designed to protect against, then those FPVs can take out anything else. Not the least of which is the usage of very questionable material and placement of said material on a towed artillery piece. Russian engineering at its finest. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for tuning in as we ensure the ridiculous curiosities across the Russian political, economic, and military spectrums don't go unseen, and ultimately help to serve as a dire warning to other would-be aggressors. So that's it, and I do hope to see all of you guys there on the next one. Cheers!